G'day! As vintage computer enthusiasts, we often focus on the games that we played on the machines back in the day, but today I'd like to take a look at an obscure office application that people used to use back in the 80s. Let's take a quick look at Open Access. Open Access is an integrated office suite, much like something like Microsoft Works. My dad bought the Open Access entry version in 1990 with our new 386 computer. As you can imagine, the entry version is the stripped down basic edition of Open Access. It only really has the spreadsheet and word processor, with the other features being a little bit stripped back. For instance, the database program is pretty much limited only to entering new records. And the graphics feature really is just an extension of Spreadsheet, providing you the option to make graphs out of your data. The full edition would include a communications program, which is essentially just a terminal emulator that allows you to dial out using a dial-up modem, and a full database program which would allow you to design the database as well as enter data. And finally, the most interesting feature, it has a programming language built in. We'll see some of these features in another version of Open Access later. But let's first check out the word processor and spreadsheet feature of the entry version. The word processor is extremely basic, and it doesn't have many of the features you'd find on more modern packages. It only really has very basic formatting functions. You can toggle the three options of bold, italics, and underline, but you have no control over what font is used. And there is some control for the margins, tab stops, and auto indent features as well. I suspect the lack of features is because of the printers that were available at the time. The most common printers you found at the time were dot matrix or daisy wheel printers, and it wasn't easy to switch fonts on those, and you couldn't be guaranteed that any particular printer would have a specific font. So software like this would leave it up to the end user and their printer for font support, only offering simple font options such as bold, italics, and underline. We had an Epson EX1000 printer, so we had 3 different font options and quality options that we could select, but this had to be done on the printer rather than in the software. The word processor is lacking other major features as well, such as a spell checker or grammar checker. There were certainly many other word processing packages that were better than this one, but it would have certainly been better than nothing. The integrated spreadsheet program is much more advanced, being much more comparable to its competitors like Lotus 123. It's not quite as capable as 123 as it can't take advantage of larger memory sizes, so you can't have as much data in your spreadsheet as you might with other applications. It does manage to do everything else though, such as formulas, recalculating, copying entries, and even stuff like mail merge and copying data from databases. And you can make charts with the separate graphics module. From what I can tell, the formula system is very comparable to what's available in Lotus 123, but I think the syntax of how the formulas work is slightly different, so you wouldn't be able to take knowledge of other systems and use it in this one. Lotus 123 was basically considered the standard for spreadsheets at the time, so many programs adhered to that standard, so it's a little unusual that this one is different. Although for my father, it didn't really make a lot of difference to him, as he didn't need to interoperate with other systems. That is, of course, until he had to migrate to another Office package. As simple as it was, Open Access was a really big improvement over what people did before they used computers for doing their accounts. For instance, my father had these massive spreadsheet books which he did the calculations for the farm accounts in when I was a kid, and it would take him hours of just going over these numbers to just get his accounts done. When he got the computer, he saved a lot of time just calculating numbers and doing his accounts. And it was much easier from what he tells me anyway. as a kid, I just found the whole thing fascinating. I really just used the program to write silly stories and maybe do a little bit of homework and just basically play around with the software features like the graphics. I didn't really do much serious work with it, but it is still nostalgic for me today because it was one of the first programs I used. There was, of course, a more complete version of Open Access which had a lot more features. I downloaded the much more recent version 3 from WinWorld PC. Being a later version, it has a lot more features, but also more programs available, such as communications, programmer, and a more complete database system. Programs such as word processor and Spreadsheet also make a return from the previous version. These have some added features, so let's take a quick look at those now. The Spreadsheet program is largely the same and hasn't been changed very much. The main thing that's changed is the graphics module is no longer a separate part, but is now integrated into the Spreadsheet program. I had a quick play with the graphics module to see if it could do anything more or better than the older version, but it doesn't seem to be able to, except for the ability to use VGA graphics and more colours. The main thing that's been changed in the word processor is the addition of a spell checking feature. There are a few different ways that it works. One where it will check the spelling of your words as you type them. One where you can get it to check the spelling of the whole document all at once. And another where you can get it to check the spelling of a selected area. It was a little bit difficult to use, but after a while I figured it out. It did seem to make some rookie errors, but it could just be me not knowing how to use it properly. Other than that, most of the features of the word processor have remained unchanged. It has the same formatting options and the same printer support, so not much is different here. Taking a look at some of the newer features, I found the database program to be quite interesting. So the first thing is, this gives you the option now to design and build the tables in addition to entering data, but also it has a very crude SQL query system. I didn't try it out in too much depth, but it seems that it supports some very basic SQL queries, so that you can actually do something a little bit more than just storing data and retrieving it. I don't think it supports the more complicated SQL functions such as left joins or outer joins, but I'd have to check the Open Access manual to be sure. Another new program is the communications function. It's basically a simple terminal program that allows the end user to connect to a bulletin board or other kind of system via your modem. It seems it doesn't have some basic functions like using X modem or Y modem or Z modem to transfer files, so its usefulness would have been limited by the fact you can't upload or download data with this program. The last new program is called the Programmer, and it's probably the most interesting function in Open Access. It is essentially a basic-like programming language that allows you to customize completely what Open Access does for you. For instance, you can build a front end on to the database system, allowing you to have what looks like a custom application for your database system. This looks like a really cool and flexible and useful feature, but I don't recognize the programming language being used, so it's a bit hard to actually build anything new with it today. There are a couple of example programs that show you exactly what the programming language can do. The first program looks like a very basic interaction demo, showcasing how the computer can interact with the user, asking for new information, and getting them to select options out of menus. It doesn't really serve any function other than to show the beginner what can be done with the user interface. The second sample program appears to be a very simple database application, using many of the tables that came on the sample disk. It allows you to do some very basic editing of the records, insert new records for instance, like I'm doing here, and also get a few reports out of the system from the look of it. As a sample, it's a pretty good example of how someone might use the programming system to make something much more complicated. I can see that with enough time and effort, you could produce an interactive corporate database with something like this. So that was an overview of Open Access. Taking a look at its individual components, I think it's safe to say that they're comparatively simplistic and don't have as many features as the dedicated competitors out there such as Lotus 123, WordPerfect, or DBase. What it does offer though is one software package that unified all of these functions into one space, which would have been significantly cheaper at the time because these software packages were quite expensive. I don't know if Open Access is the first integrated Office suite, but I'm pretty sure it must be one of the first, as other integrated Office suites like Works didn't come out until several years later, which didn't come out until the early 90s. If you compare it to something much more modern, it doesn't even hold a candle to what we use today, but you've got to remember that this was a product of its time. The other Office programs had similar user interfaces that were keyboard reliant and required memorizing shortcut keys, and WYSIWYG interfaces didn't really come about on the IBM PC until Windows 3.1 was a thing. Anyhow, that's pretty much all I have to say about Open Access. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.